200,000 kilometer mark from the Earth, and thus the object passes closer to the Earth than the Moon. Also, at the end of the first and at the beginning of the second year of the new millennium, an asteroid the size of a few hundred meters, which will still be unknown to the earthly scientists until then, will cross Earth's orbit at a distance of a little more than 500,000 kilometers away, as this will also be the case several times with a small number of other asteroids until then. With a few exceptions, all of these objects will be discovered by the terrestrial scientists and amateur astronomers when the time comes closer to the Earth. This also applies in relation to comets, which are newly discovered and which sometimes exhibit orbital periods that are thousands of years long, for they travel far beyond the Oort cloud in their orbits. Billy says, well, then to purely earthly problems, if I may say so. Actually, it is a problem that the earthly fortune tellers, astrologers and clairvoyants, etc. drive the people into anxiety and terror with their allegedly precise predictions. One of you once said that a clearly and rationally thinking person, if he considers, analyzes and, therefore, evaluates all facts precisely, arrives at a prediction rate of about 14% reliability, respectively accuracy, while the percentages for the clairvoyants, fortune tellers, and astrologers and similar stored nonsense bringers are only at an accuracy rate of a maximum of 3 to 4%. Quetzal says that, too, is correct. People who use their normal and healthy intellect to make a prediction of the future on the basis of existing situations and events, facts, etc., and, thus, on the basis of past and present situations of any kind, usually arrive at an average correctness value of about 14%. This, in contrast to all the flimsy, misleading, fanciful, senseless, and unrealistic projections and statements of clairvoyants, astrologers and fortune tellers, etc., whose success rates lie at a maximum of 3 to 4%. Billy says then at least 3 to 4% accuracy. Quetzal says unfortunately no, for this isn't something that is based on a recognition of the future but solely on a stroke of fate, which is erroneously called chance by the Earth people, although there is no such thing in that sense because chance is only given when, for example, something falls to our person, such as portion of a profit or, otherwise, a share of something. Only in this way can the term chance have its correctness, but not with respect to when something unexpected arises, which one wasn't counting on and, therefore, which arises from the joining together of the given and complementary and interlocking relationships, and thus becomes a stroke of fate. Billy says you explained that well. In truth, things, situations, and events, as well as occurrences, etc., simply fit themselves together and join into one another in such a way that a particular effect emerges from this, freely according to the law of causality, that is, the law of cause and effect. This will result in certain effects that, in turn, arise from specific causes, as I just explained. So strokes of fate are nothing other than occurrences, events, incidents, and situations, etc. that result from a certain joining together, in order to act as specific causes. So, for example, if it happens that two people meet unexpectedly somewhere in a foreign country, then it cannot and should not be designated as chance but rather solely as a stroke of fate, for the causes of this are given that both people traveled to the same country and are staying at the same place, where they will then meet. So the one joins itself to the other and the one to another, from which then emerges the result, respectively the effect, even the stroke of fate. Quetzal says another time, I must say that this, too, is correct. Billy says nice. Good then. Here, I have another question from an 11-year-old boy, who occupies himself with ornithology and, thus, with the study of birds. He asked me about how the birds know what they can eat. With this, he means what is edible for them and what is inedible, respectively toxic, for them, or how the birds know, in particular, what berries to eat, whether the fruits would be ripe and good for them. Quetzal says that is no secret. Mature fruits and berries store and reflect solar radiation, and when these are ripe, they emit light in the ultraviolet range, even when the sun isn't shining. This shortwave light is perceived by the birds, as well as by certain animals and insects, and it is the signal that the fruits or berries are ripe for digestion. This equally applies to the edibility of fruits and berries, grasses and leaves, etc., which emit a certain radiation that is perceived by the organisms, and that informs them that the food which is important for them is non-toxic. Billy says thank you for the explanation, the boy will be happy about it. With Semyaza, I once observed an optical phenomenon in the Arctic, namely 3 suns, which came about by the fact that the real sun was reflected twice in the atmosphere, once to the left and once to the right of its actual location. What I want to ask is this: does this phenomenon appear every year? Quetzal says that is correct, yes. Billy says, as a doctor and physician, etc., you can surely explain to me how fatigue arises, right? Quetzal says I can do that. In the nerve cells, the resting substance, adenosine, is formed, through which listlessness and fatigue arise. Billy says, and can this actually be counteracted with coffee and tea? Quetzal says the waking amine, caffeine, of coffee and the theine of tea can actually counteract the adenosine. If substances such as caffeine or theine, etc., are fed to the body while it is lethargic, tired, and in need of recuperation, then these will produce a counter-effect with respect to the adenosine, namely by suppressing or neutralizing this, whereby the maximum effect of the caffeine and theine or other similar waking amines will be achieved, but only about 1 hour after their consumption. But soon the effect of the waking amines will diminish again, which means for the body in need of recuperation and for its nerve cells which produce the adenosine that now, the resting substance must be increasingly produced, by what means listlessness and fatigue become apparent in an intensified form. Billy says lately, the question arises again and again as to what circumstances cause the so-called infant death, whereby there are many speculations about this. Can you tell me a few things about this? Quetzal says because there are several reasons for this, it wouldn't make sense to mention them all. However, it should be said that there is an erroneous view of the so-called infant death, which is also known as sudden infant death syndrome among the Earth people. This erroneous view consists of the notion that small children, primarily infants, are supposed to be placed on their bellies in order to be put to sleep or after a meal. This crazy view is based on the wrong acceptance that there is a lower risk of choking if the child would suddenly vomit or simply cough up what has been eaten. But when infants are placed on their bellies, they are exposed to the risk that the heart and lungs, as well as the other vital organs, will become impaired in their functions as a result of the pressure on the belly, which can lead to sudden death, and also to the fact that the exhaled carbon dioxide is inhaled again, due to the infant lying on the belly, which can lead to a quick and deadly result. Another important point to be mentioned in relation to sudden infant death syndrome is found with the parents or parental guardians. And, unfortunately, precisely this fact to be mentioned is unknown to the doctors and medical professionals and to the courts and supervisory bodies on Earth, which is extremely regrettable. The reason why there are so many sudden infant deaths to be mentioned in all countries of the world, although mainly in the so-called civilized countries or industrial nations, is because sudden infant death syndrome is induced consciously and also unconsciously by a parent, or even by both parents, but also by parental substitutes, namely when these lose nervous control over themselves and uncontrollably maltreat the infants, shaking and abusing them to such an extent that deadly injuries to the brain arise, by what means sudden death occurs within minutes, hours, or a few days. Unfortunately, this fact will run rampant more and more, for the people, mainly those of the industrialized countries, become increasingly indifferent, addicted to pleasure, unsteady, unkind, and disliking among themselves and toward each other. But at the same time, they also strain their nerves as a result of this, which lets them get out of control very quickly, in order to commit thoughtless and uncontrolled actions as a further consequence, accompanied by fierce anger that can have